How many books do you have stacked? Because I have
Only
3.
2.
The top book is currently
that
called
was
Jarvis 1, which I still haven't read. I'm sorry, Paul.
Oh.
But it makes a great mic stand.
You're using it for its true purpose.
Yeah, bolstering my own career. Thank you, Pa. Welcome back, nerds. It's time for another episode of HAMYAW, and today we want to talk about one of the hazards of being visible as a creative, as a professional, as a thought leader, as an authority, as a whatever you're aiming to be in the space. Because it's almost impossible to show up consistently and persistently in your industry doing your creative work without avoiding something Margo and I call creative embarrassment. Basically, what happens when you put something out there in the world and it does not go as planned. Either you are getting mocked, people hate it, or maybe worse if you're Margo, because she considers this a worse fate, you're ignored. I think this idea of creative embarrassment is something that is just one of, again, the hazards and side effects of showing up and consistently being a creative and going pro with your chosen art. But I think there are different ways to handle it. Some people can't handle it, but I think Margo and I have some strategies we want to share with you. And also, we want to share our very first embarrassing stories around creativity.
I mean, where do I start? When you first gave me this prompt, when we were like, well, this is what we're going to talk about, I couldn't even come up with one because literally every single endeavor I have been on has been like a profound failure, and I'm mostly surprised by the wins. And I was like, oh, that one worked. Like, I'm so acclimated to it. I mean, like, literally right before we got on filming, I posted on Instagram and 5 people liked it. Like,
it's been up for like 40 minutes. I think she's overreacting.
That's a long time. Hey. But that's my point. Like, that's my point. You just don't know. The one before that had like over 100 something, which by the way, my numbers are small. Okay, I get it. But like, but the point is, like, it's always you're always just like one post away from creative embarrassment at all times.
God, that's so true.
And you never quite get there. I think that's the part that has been most shocking to me is that, like, I used to think as a kid that you get to this point where like you turn pro and you sort of get it. But I remember watching Seinfeld's documentary on Netflix recently, and he's this amazing, has so many accolades under his belt. And when he gets up to do stand-up, it's still just him in the audience judging his jokes and deciding whether or not he's funny. And like, you know, it's like the same circumstances that existed, you know, 30 years ago when he was starting are the same ones that it never goes away. It never, ever goes away. And so I think like the real challenge is how do you acclimate to that, knowing that those things are true?
So I will start by telling my first story of creative embarrassment. I was getting active in the fan fiction space, the fanfiction.net archives. You can probably still find my stuff. So I was about 16 years old, and this was around the time one of the Star Wars prequels came out. I forget which one it was, and I had this huge crush on Ewan McGregor. I mean, who did it? Anybody with taste in the early millennium was an Ewan fan. So I put this story together, and it was just like a short story. I'm a 16-year-old girl. I'm going to put myself in the story with my fictional character crush. There's going to be a romance. Things are going to happen. So I put that story together, and I actually had some already successful fics prior, and so I put it up and I was like, all right, well, we'll see where that goes. That was fun to write, sort of. I hope people like it. And I logged back on a couple of days later to a string of comments. And I was like, oh, great.
Never read the comments.
Wonderful.
Oh, no.
So I start reading the comments, and somebody had posted my fanfic to a website called godawfulfanfiction.net. Somebody had posted it, and trolls were essentially coming over from godawfulfanfiction.net to tear me apart. They had no idea I was 16. I'm sure they probably guessed. They had no idea that I was just a girl sitting in her living room with tears running down her face. But I remember my heart just plummeting to my shoes and feeling so embarrassed and so ashamed and just so frustrated with myself that I would have ever dared to put something that people would be so universally hated out there. Fortunately, nobody had any idea what my fanfiction.net handle was or that I was even posting this stuff. So what I did was I deleted it before anybody else could find out. And I did not tell a soul until I actually wrote about until now. Congratulations. No, I didn't tell a soul until 2017 when I actually wrote about creative shame on my media or on my blog. And that always stuck with me because it was very much a moment where I was like, wow, if people don't like something you make, it really hurts. Mm-hmm. And there's not a lot you can do. So do you keep going or do you quit? And at what point do you figure out like how to handle it and when to keep going?
So why did you keep going?
Why did I keep going? I couldn't stop. Writing's been the only thing I've ever been good at. So I just had to keep doing it. But I kept going because I was like, okay, nobody has to know this ever happened. It will be a secret that I will take to the grave.
Yep.
And then I might not even tell St. Peter. But I think it was basically the idea that I knew something was bad and I wanted to prove it to people that I was better. And I wanted to prove it to myself that I was better. So I kept going. That story of like figuring out, your first creative failure is something that stays with everybody. And it can make you feel, it still makes me cringe to this day. But I think it was a useful tool because it's when you are in that zone of confrontation, you decide how much your work is worth to you. It doesn't matter how much it's worth to anybody else. You decide whether you're going to be the one to keep going and F the haters, or if you're going to let them sort of cause you to fold and crumple. But I know everybody has a creative embarrassment story, so I've told mine. Margo, I want to hear you tell yours.
What's standing out to me is actually not even one about writing, but one about dance. So when I was like 6 and 7 years old, I founded a dance group called the MJ Group, Margo and Jenny. We had bright neon pink business cards that we handed out with our home phone numbers. I was the choreographer.
Do you still have one, please?
I definitely still have it. I think I have it on Instagram, no lie. But we did birthday parties, which meant just all of my cousins. That was your birthday gift. Sorry. We did the Jackson 5, we did Aladdin, we did Newsies. We were like, solid. But I remember one particular birthday party that was mine where we had produced a whole choreography, an entire run of show. And I remember at one point, people's eyes started to glaze over and my mother made a comment that like, maybe we should wrap it up. And at the time, I remember being so mortified because it never occurred to me that people wouldn't be interested in my dancing. It never occurred to me that it wasn't the most entertaining piece of art you have watched in your life.
I would always be entertained by your dancing.
Thank you. In retrospect, I found some of these videos. My mom found like the home videos, like literally we're doing one move. I thought it was advanced choreography and I'm just like going like this the whole time. And
oh my God.
like I had no idea. And like, of course, my mom was probably saving everyone from, I would have gone on for like 3 hours. I had no concept of time, no concept of other people's experience. But I do remember it feeling like I was mortified. Just mortified that I was forcing people to do something that might be boring or uninteresting or made them think that I was mock-worthy, like you were saying. Yeah. And so it's sort of, that's a little bit where the self-consciousness got bred that wasn't there before. Like I didn't know to think about audience reactions until that moment where I was like, oh, you don't like me? You don't feel like I'm as great as as I am?
First of all, how dare you? But no, it's so true. Actually, Emilia Clarke from Game of Thrones has a story about, it's just so interesting, her story about her first play when she realized she wanted to be an actress. And she apparently got on stage and just forgot all of her lines and just stood there in total silence. But she wasn't afraid in the moment. She was just like feeling pretty strong, just like looking out, being like, huh. Like she wasn't scared. She was just having a moment and only, I think you realize to get embarrassed after the fact. And I think you raised such a good point that when we are young and we're starting to create, we don't think about that. We're just so excited about what we're doing. We assume that everyone else is going to be excited too. And then there's that ice cold water on our heads that creative work in order to exist must receive some kind of feedback, positive or negative. And that's the hazard. Like the one thing that creative work needs to work, which is an audience, is the one thing that can also tank it. And I think that's those sort of two extremes. Like, and you also don't get to a point of powerful and prolific creativity without experience. What was your word? Profound failure and embarrassment. So I think everyone should know, HAMYAW, the result of profound failure, founded on the bedrock. And I think that's sort of learning how to handle it and adjust to it is an ever continuing challenge. I don't think there's one like strategy that you can come up with, but I know in my experience, what has been really helpful for me is just remembering how short people's memories are. It's been helpful. And I think when people, this is when I talk to my students, and I know your students too, because we talk to each other students, there's so much of this fear when you are continuing to be visible and put yourself out there and be sort of in the spotlight or turn the spotlight on yourself. That is the greatest fear, is that people are going to make fun of me. They're not going to like it. In fact, they're going to hate it, or they're going to ignore it completely, and I'm going to be shouting it into the void. Yeah. And I think the only way to get comfortable with that is to do it over and over and over again.
In public. Like that's the other thing that people don't realize. Like you said something really smart. Like the thing about art is that it doesn't exist until it has that interaction with the audience. Not to say that your writing isn't good or probably amazing that has never been seen, but it's in that interaction that it becomes you being in the arena.
Yeah.
And where it takes on a life of its own that becomes bigger than you, and buffering yourself against that reaction. Because there are times where the feedback is useful. Well, okay, let's start with this framework. So you mentioned that you've got to remember that people's memories are not that long.
Yeah.
So I'm going to add one of my strategies, which is, this is an alt MBA concept, that there's a difference between praise, criticism, and feedback.
Yes.
And it is up to us to know which ones we actually need. So there are times where again, you learn this through doing, where I have handed someone a piece of work and said, like, I love your thoughts. And what I should have asked for was praise, because it was too early and I didn't actually need feedback yet, because I'm smart enough to figure out, or like at that stage, I could have figured out what was wrong with the piece. And I needed them just to say, keep going. I've heard, I think it was Liz Gilbert went on a rant, and I want to go on the same one, against brutal honesty. She was like, why would you ever be brutal with someone's vulnerability and their work? I will never be brutal to you. And how is that helpful? Like, it's never, ever helpful. That's just criticism.
Yeah. And this is so true. And I didn't even realize that this is part of my work, especially when I do like hot seats and I'm giving criticism. I always start with a compliment. Always. 100%. Like, and it's a genuine compliment. I always find something to love about the work, and then you deliver the feedback, because the person needs to remember, like, just because something isn't working doesn't mean they're not smart. And I find that when people are like, I'm brutally honest, it's that they really like to make themselves feel bigger than other creatives. Like that, if somebody's like, MO is brutal honesty, I'll kick your ass, I won't sugarcoat anything. Like, this creative work in so many ways is people's spirit laid out on a plate. Like, why wouldn't you want to be at least a little bit tender and gentle with that? Like, who wins when you are being brutal?
Totally. Your ego wins. Your fucking ego wins. I mean, it's so stupid and it's so nearsighted. Like, it doesn't actually move the piece forward. Yeah. I mean, you can give someone, you could say, like, the syntax in here is difficult to understand, or it takes away from your main point. You could say something like that without being like, this is a bad sentence. Like, one 15-year-old, the other one is a fucking professional.
My mom used to edit my essays in high school and middle school and generally everything. I remember once she took a paragraph on one of my essays, marked it out, and wrote crapola in red on top of the paragraph. And I was like, oh my God, she was right. But at the same time, I don't think I learned any more from seeing crap on the page than I would have learned saying, this paragraph, I don't think this works, remove. Yes. We got our creative embarrassment solutions.
If you're asking for feedback on a piece from a friend, give them guidelines. If you're putting something out into the world, recognize that there's a pattern. I didn't get to this point. The pattern is someone is going to love your work more than anything they've ever seen. Someone's going to hate it and think it should die in a garbage fire. And someone's going to ask a genuinely good question. There's literally no one in the middle, and those three show up every time. So when you start to see that it's a pattern and it actually has nothing to do with you, it's easier to keep putting the work out. But that's not to say, like, give me a fuck ton of praise, because that is really great. It never hurts.
What I need everybody to do is go on my blog right now and tell me how much they love me.
But the point is, on the second strategy is to also, it takes a level of self-awareness to know that, like, if I'm posting on Instagram, sometimes it's because I want to be liked. But if I'm sending an email out to my list, it's because I wanted to share a message, and how you receive it is up to you. There's a difference in the context of both of those things.
And I also think, to the final point, and this is the reason why we wanted to make this episode, was that we wanted everyone to know that they are not alone in their fear and discomfort with creative embarrassment. I think that is the biggest thing. And the other way to sort of move through that experience is to remember every single creative you worship, respect, like, dislike goes through this. If there's a creative who's like, nah, I'm breezing, we good. Like maybe it's Beyonce, but she's also done so much work to get there. You know, I know people who don't even like Beyonce, and
that's not true.
Imagine that. That's true. Not true. I have proof. I have it in writing. Only one. There's only one, but they exist. And I know one. Again, it's remembering that, and I love, Margo, that you framed it with those three things: someone who loves it, someone who hates it, someone who asks a really good question. And as long as you're getting that kind of response, preferably you're getting all love. We wish you all the love in the world. But if you have all three of those responses, maybe more one than the other, that's okay. And that's a reason to keep going, because it means people are reacting.
Yes. And there's a difference between a fundamental problem with your work and you being flawed.
Yes.
There have been times where I've gotten feedback where I went, oh shit, I really did. Like, that's a weakness in my argument. And that's actually rightful, fair criticism. And then there's other times when someone's just being a shithead.
Yeah. Again, trying to make themselves feel bigger. And that's understanding the difference between like brutal honesty and worthy feedback, and feedback that is applicable. And I think all of us have to check our egos at the door for a moment, just by the sheer process of putting out creative work and receiving feedback on it, by saying like, if you are automatically defensive to everything, you can't improve. However, learning to be discerning with the way you interpret, because we're all discerning with the way we interpret praise subconsciously, because we're like, I really thank you so much for liking it. I don't know if it was that good. Like, are they trying to like butter me up? What's happening? Like, we're all we can be so skeptical of praise. Yeah. I also think not necessarily being skeptical of feedback, but saying like, when it happens that somebody raises a good point or points out a flaw in your argument, part of the reason why you're showing up, the reason why art exists, is to start those conversations. So you are still bringing value in that sense, but you have to learn to figure out when somebody's attacking you as a person versus not necessarily pointing out a flaw in your argument, but helping you also grow by showing you things you haven't seen before.
Yes. So. The third one is having people in your tribe who you can talk to about your creative process, about your creative wins, and about your creative failures. So I love having Hillary in my corner as someone who like gets it. And it's really hard when you talk to someone who maybe they're putting their work on the line, but it's not in a creative field. And so the like emotional mind fuck of putting your work out into the world, having all those gremlins of fear and resistance come up, and then seeing what happens. Like, you need someone who's well-versed in the messiness of the process to tell you, keep going, or like pause, and like has the right eyes to do that, and the professionalism to be able to help you on your own journey. And it takes a while to find those people, honestly.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I think and I'm so grateful to have Margo in my corner for the same reason. Like, if you guys listened to Nora Vox's, it would shock you just how much self-doubt both of us, I mean, maybe it wouldn't shock you, but maybe it does. Just how much sort of self-doubt, like even when we've been in this industry almost 10 years, that still creeps up, whether it's about creative work, whether it's about the business side of things. Like, you need allies. And if you don't have creative allies, then I think starting the hunt for 1 or 2 or 10 would be ideal. And also, we want to meet your creative allies. So if you have a creative ally, somebody who you really love collaborating with, who's always giving you advice, tag them in the comments, link to their stuff, because we want to meet them and we want to celebrate your glorious creative allyship, because we need each other out here on these internet streets, guys. When you create, when you put yourself out there, when you are vulnerable enough to put your concepts onto a page to be read by dozens of people, hundreds, thousands, millions, you are incredibly courageous and you need support. So go get them.
Go get support. All right, so we have our 3 things. We have 1, the internet is 15 minutes. People's memories are short. Number 2, there's a difference between praise, criticism, and feedback. Know which one you're looking for and which one you need, and also recognize the patterns have nothing to do with you. Number 3, get yourself creative allies who understand the difference between when you should abort and when you should keep going. Shout out Shannon McNay. She has been my creative ally for years and years and years. And number 4, keep watching HAMYAW. Because I know that, like, I know it's kind of a plug, but also we dump on inspiration and motivation sometimes where we're like, you need action. But like, sometimes you're so in the shit, you actually do need some motivation. You do need inspiration, and we shouldn't knock it. Like, if you're reading Pressfield and it makes you feel better, if you're reading Big Magic, if you're reading Stephen King, if you need to read some fucking Dostoevsky, like whatever it is that gets you back on the train, I don't know you.
Dostoevsky's so motivating. Just so inspired to action. Anyway, go on.
You do You do you. But find those things that keep you going, because this is hard. It is hard work, and you are constantly going to discount yourself throughout the process. And so you need to normalize it. And these things help you do that. This has been our conversation on creative embarrassment. I feel like we could talk for 30 more hours, which I have horror stories coming up in my mind that I want to like get away, but
we'll save those for a bonus episode.
All right, this has been HAMYAW. I'm Margo Aaron.
And I'm Hillary Weiss.
If you like this episode, like it below. Post about your creative allies in the comments. We'd love to meet them. We'd love to champion them. All the good conversations are happening down there. Tell all your friends and subscribe to our channel. We'll see you in 2 weeks.
Bye, guys.